what's on your radar.
Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene is one of the most ideologically consistent, truly America First members of Congress. She's a patriot, she's a Republican, she's MAGA, and she supports President Trump. But she isn't afraid to say what policy areas are working and which ones are not. To that end, she recently appeared on Tim Dillon's podcast and made some news by admitting that she thinks the tariffs might be getting in the way of President Trump's agenda by driving up costs for manufacturers. Let's watch.
And I'm talking to major manufacturing companies they're saying we support the president, we support what he's trying, his long-term goal, but we're having problems with these tariffs. And now we're having problems. We can't get supplies from this country and we can't get supplies from this country. And there's problems. But have regular people's bank accounts been affected? Has the stress come off? No, that has not happened yet. And that needs to be the major focus.
And it's not just tariffs. MTG also explained why the administration's deportation policy, if taken to an extreme, is going to hurt American businesses. Watch this.
As a conservative and as a business owner in the construction industry and as a realist, I can say we have to do something about labor, and that needs to be a smarter plan than just rounding up every single person and deporting them just like that.
Right.
So, and I'm going to get pushback on that, but I'm just living in reality from here on out.
Yeah.
And if anybody's mad at me for saying the truth, then I'm sorry.
Bravo. Now, undoubtedly, some regime sycophants are going to be knocking MTG for daring to speak her mind and admit that she recognizes some downsides associated with tariffs and mass deportations. I see things differently. In fact, I think we need to start calling her based Marjorie Taylor Greene, because she's absolutely right. And smart people in the administration need to listen to her because they already know what she's saying is correct. Let's be clear. Trump was absolutely elected president with a mandate to reduce illegal immigration and mitigate the harms associated with it. That's absolutely true. We need to reduce crime and unfair competition from foreign labor, workers who don't have to follow the same labor regulations as Americans because of their illicit status. By all means, let's work on that. But we can't just round up everybody who's technically here illegally and who's working without devastating the farming sector, the hospitality sector, the tech sector, and so on. The Republican Party is the party of business. It's the party of big business and small business. We can't drive labor costs up for business owners and expect to remain in power. GOP voters and Americans writ large want food to cost less. They want electronics to cost less. They want services to cost less. And it's not just about the immigrants, it's also, as Based MTG notes, about the tariffs. If businesses have to pay more money to obtain raw materials, they pass those costs on to you and to me. It's just a fact. Trump is well within his rights to use U.S. trade policy as a negotiating tactic with other nations in hopes of bringing down overall barriers to trade between America and the rest of the world. But painful, significant, across-the-board tariffs are going to cripple U.S. industries. That's the great irony of the populist faction of MAGA. They say we need to reshore our factories and have manufacturing take place domestically. But then they're unwilling to push for the policies that we would need in order to make that possible. Free trade for the relevant raw materials and more permissive labor regulations, including around immigration. MTG understands that because, unlike many of her colleagues in the Republican and Democratic parties, well, A, she's actually a business owner, and B, she listens to her constituents. She asks them what their concerns are. Amazing concept. Maybe more members of Congress could perhaps follow her lead on that. So I don't know, Lindsay. I'm starting to feel an MTG for president.
Well, don't go too far. I like Marjorie Taylor Greene and what she's doing right now. Overall, I think that it's important to speak out. I do want to just be honest. Re-election season is next year. She has a lot on her agenda. It is important to answer to constituents if you would like to keep your position.
Yeah.
I mean, people are not ordained into office, right? They get voted in.
She takes calls. I love when she does interviews. She says, here's what I'm hearing. She's always
talking about,
what she's
and
hearing.
also I appreciate,
Right.
like you said, people speaking from a business perspective. Now, you took what I said about Marjorie Taylor Greene last week and flipped it on its head. I said, oh, this is just a calling out of the Republican Party. You said, oh, no, she still is aligned with Trump, but she just calling out these things. Well, the biggest things of his presidency the last 9 months, she has vehemently disagreed on wholeheartedly. So We're talking about Epstein, huge issue in his presidency. We're talking about the handling of Israel and Hamas. She literally called it a genocide, which is not words that you hear many people in her party saying. We're talking about healthcare. The president does not want to negotiate with Democrats regarding healthcare. She does, and she wants those premiums not to double at the beginning of next year. And now we're talking about immigration. She literally does not like the policies and the way it's going about it when you're watching children be separated from their parents who were just working here and living a normal life, not criminals, but be taken away by ICE. And so that would, to me, just make her a Democrat. I don't know why that would just... These are all big policies. This is completely against everything that the party is standing for right now. So why does this not, to you, send a sign? And let me finish my overall point, because I do think that I know you want to isolate it as, somebody who's just outspoken and bold. And two things can be true at once. She is outspoken and bold. At the same time, she is the antithesis to many things that President Trump is actively campaigning on. Not even campaigning, he has the job actively pushing forward. She is literally saying the opposite. So why would that make her in lockstep or even in tandem with the Republican Party right now when Democrats are saying the same things that she's saying? Just help me understand and paint the picture about how she's not breaking away from the party. And we talk about the voices that she's echoing. Theo Vaughn, Joe Rogan. We're hearing some of the same complaints that she's bringing up come up in this podcasting space that you covet so much. And so it just sounds to me more like the way you're trying to position it is very too generous and nice from what it actually is, to break away from MAGA as a whole.
Let's take those one by one. On Epstein, the Democrats have moved to where the MAGA position was. So that's, not reflective of her changing her position. On healthcare, you maybe have a point there. She is now echoing talking points of Democrats on healthcare. On that one, I don't agree with her. I'll back the president on that one. Although he said something like maybe we should give them the subsidies. I would not increase the healthcare or maintain the healthcare subsidies. So we disagree on that. Now, on labor policy and tariffs, look, it is possible, I think, to support reducing more violent crime associated with illegal immigration and using tariffs as a strategy for negotiating trade deals. That is fine, but what the Republican Party should be cognizant of, and Trump should be cognizant of, and people in the orbit should understand, is that the higher costs associated with deporting the workers and tariffing the raw materials get passed on to consumers in the form of higher prices. And that is exactly what Trump ran on. Stop. Yes, I know he said tariffs are not a surprise, deportation should not be a surprise, but there are trade-offs. And the trade-off is higher prices, and that is going to derail the entire agenda if it is not dealt with.
And quickly,
the deportation's got to be more strategic. Stop. Watch the farming sector. Watch the South Korean people who are building a factory that nobody else knows even how to build, and we deported them. That was the stupidest thing we've ever done. And all that. What I'm saying is more listening to Marjorie Taylor Greene will be to the benefit of the Republican Party.
Robby, what's on your radar today?
Give Donald Trump the Nobel Peace Prize. Do it. Seriously, there's a good argument to be made that the president deserves it. Thanks to Trump, there's finally peace in Gaza, and all remaining living Israeli hostages have been returned. Trump achieved what President Biden could not. He persuaded the Israeli government, which under Benjamin Netanyahu has been extremely reluctant to end the war, to make at least a temporary peace with Hamas, the terrorist group responsible for the October 7 massacre. No one can predict the future, and if the past is any indication, peace often proves to be elusive in this part of the world. That said, there is renewed optimism and a real hope that peace could return, a peace that involves the safety and security of Israel and its people, as well as self-determination and new leadership for the Gaza Strip under a government that wants to live in harmony side by side with Israel. And the man who got it done, Donald Trump, deserves the Nobel Peace Prize. Here was the president of Pakistan formally nominating Trump for the prize yesterday.
One of the greatest days in contemporary history, because peace has been achieved after untiring efforts led by President Trump, who is genuinely a man of peace, who has relentlessly and untiringly worked throughout these months, day in and day out, to make this world a place to live with peace and prosperity.
News broke last week, of course, that the 2025 Nobel Peace Prize would be awarded to Maria Corina Machado, a Venezuelan political activist who has worked tirelessly against the despotic and socialist Maduro regime in that country. Now, I did see some chatter on social media from, shall we say, extremely eager fans of President Trump who were actually dismissive of Machado and insisted that the Nobel Committee screwed up by giving the prize to her instead of to Trump. Stephen Chung, for instance, who works for White House Comm, suggested that in choosing Machado instead of Trump, the committee, quote, proved they placed politics over peace. Now, it's true that the committee has gravely erred in the past, including by prematurely awarding President Barack Obama a Nobel Peace Prize in 2009, just a few months into his first term, even though Obama had accomplished very, very little, practically nothing in terms of fostering peace. But Machado, unlike Obama, is a perfectly good choice. In fact, she sees herself as a fellow traveler and ally of Trump. In remarks following her receipt of the award, she praised Trump and even dedicated her victory to him. Watch this.
And they decided to dedicate it to President Trump because he deserves it. Because not only has he been involved in only a few months in solving 8 wars, but his actions have been decisive to have Venezuela now at a threshold of freedom after 26 years of tyranny that have destroyed the lives of millions of Venezuela, destabilized the region, and undermined the institutions in the United States.
Good for Machado, who is a beacon of resistance to socialist tyranny, and there's no reason Trump can't win the prize next year, perhaps after achieving even more victories in the eternal quest for peace. Trump certainly deserves the award more than Barack Obama. If any president should get a Nobel Peace Prize, not because of vibes, or because Oslo thinks he's cool, or because he uses lofty rhetoric, but because of actual achievements in the realm of fostering peace, it should be President Donald Trump.
Donald Trump accomplished an amazing feat by bringing
and I'm ready to give him the award.
Israel and Hamas together, and that should certainly be noted, duly noted.
Mm-hmm.
No peace prize for me. I don't think that that's appropriate. Amnesty International actually calls Trump's leadership, quote, cruel and chaotic, saying that it's actually a human rights emergency. Some ways that they say that is that he suppresses dissent in the U.S. By attacking news outlets and political enemies, that he has authoritarian tactics to punish any of his critics, like he's going after Letitia James. He targets immigrants through deportations, asylum restrictions, and family separations. We see people in Chicago getting ripped away from their children as they're trying to drop them off to school. He's undermining press freedoms and attacking journalists, literally trying to throw him out of the Pentagon as we speak.
I said give him an award for peace.
He's pulling back LGBTQ rights, marginalizing.
What LGBTQ rights are being pulled back?
He's literally trying to attack the trans community.
Name me an LGBTQ right that's being pulled back.
He's trying to attack the trans community.
How is he attacking? What is he doing to the trans community?
They made the entire Charlie Kirk assassination about trans people when really
the
administration, they immediately tried to make it a political war.
Well,
and so this is not somebody who's peace.
No.
I know, but this doesn't bring peace.
The LGBTQ community is not under attack by any Trump policies.
And he's marginalizing racial minorities by pretending like history doesn't exist. So this is not somebody. He wants to erase the Smithsonian Museum.
So
why would this be somebody that wants a peace prize from me? No. He did a great thing.
You just made a series of false claims.
No, I didn't. What's untrue? He's suppressing dissent. He's suing news outlets for saying bad things about him.
What does that have to do with peace? I agree.
That's not peaceful. That's not peaceful. He's literally he wants to run state-run media in the U.S. That's not peaceful.
This is absolutely
That's not peaceful. That, like, I don't understand. I'm just telling you, I understand we have different opinions here, but I certainly think that while it's notable,
means? We're talking about ending
he's creating chaos
and
in
strife
the U.S.
between nations of the world.
While
that is
creating
what the prize
chaos
is for.
within his own country. I don't know that deserves a peace prize, is what I'm saying.
Do you think Barack Obama deserved his peace
prize?
Yes,
in 2009, he came right after President Bush, where he brought down the temperature after we went in and...
Brought down the temperature?
Yes, after we went in after weapons of mass destruction and invaded a country when when these weapons did not even exist. Barack Obama came in and brought the temperature down and said we need to denuclearize the entire world. He would love that to be a lofty goal, and that's part of the reason that he's one of the first presidents actually saying that, rather than bolster our nuclear powers.
Okay. So you get awards for saying this is exactly what I said.
Created
it's awards for saying nice things,
he also
not for
created
getting
the
it done.
relationship between Muslim people and made it a more comfortable place after they were attacked constantly after 9/11, like all Muslim people were bad. He changed that rhetoric. Sometimes your tone and the things you say, how you behave, and how you exemplify a presidential leadership quality
Lindsay,
is
that's
enough
the
to create
stupidest
peace.
thing I've ever heard.
To you.
That your attitude is more important than results.
This is not results. We don't know what's going to happen yet. He ended the war. I said we should acknowledge
He got
that.
the hostages back. How many hostages did Barack Obama get back?
I'm just telling you, I don't think he deserves a peace prize. I said
I'm
we
saying
should acknowledge
this
that
is
President
utterly-
Trump did a good job.
Not a single person would buy this argument in the entire
It's my argument. I don't think that he gets a peace prize. I also think that Machado gets a peace prize, but also aligning, and she did, like you said, I agree with you about Venezuela, but the fact
support her
that how
getting a
President
prize. I
Trump
don't
went
have
about
any
it
power to take it
by
away from
calling
her.
counter narcotics missions, counter-terrorism missions, and blowing up boats that could have killed civilians is not peaceful.
She supports that.
She supports him, but that's
She
not what
supports him doing
that's
that.
not what the world does.
She wants those
and
boats
that's terrible.
exploded.
So that headline should read: Nobel Peace Prize gets awarded to the woman who thinks that you should blow up boats that possibly have civilians on.
Well, take it. Well, then it sounds
I
like
don't
you do disagree with the committee.
I don't think that the committee is all perfect. I'm just telling you, President Trump doesn't get it. I'm not on the committee. So my argument is not whether they make bad choices or good choices. It's that President Trump certainly is not peaceful. That's my argument.
I don't, with all due respect, I don't understand how anyone could think Barack Obama was a worthy winner for doing. He ended no conflicts, none. The Afghanistan withdrawal didn't even happen until Trump.
He caused no conflict. President Trump caused conflicts every
he
single
supported
day
a war
in this country.
in Libya.
Look around. Just Google Trump. Conflict.
Not
ignited.
Conflict. I understand that domestically.
He just said
he's going.
He just said he's going to give Ukraine even more weapons.
Ukraine is being invaded.
Exactly, but that's not bringing the
Peace
temperature
doesn't
down.
always mean surrender.
You wanted it to be 6 months ago. You thought we should give Russia whatever they're asking for.
No, I didn't say whatever they were asking. I said
because
what they had
Ukraine
already
can't win.
taken in the interest of having peace now.
I don't think he should get a peace prize, Robbie. You can't kill the messenger. I'm speaking for half the country here. We don't agree.
In the normal fashion, Robbie, let's start us off with what is on your radar.
Well, we're going to start out with some agreement today. I think, Niall, no one is happy about the Pentagon's new press policy. Earlier this week, media outlets spanning the political spectrum almost universally declined to sign on to a memorandum issued by Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth. It would require defense reporters to promise that they will not seek to obtain unauthorized information. Quote, information must be approved for public release by an appropriate authorizing official before it's released, even if it is unclassified, the memorandum states. Now, Hegseth is, of course, within his rights to forbid his own employees from leaking stories to journalists to the extent that's possible, and federal officials who do leak classified documents can be prosecuted under existing law, although it's often, frankly, in the public's interest for them to do so anyway. But if anything is to be done, government policy should place constraints on government employees, not on journalists or the public. Now, obviously, reporters are going to try to induce Pentagon officials to provide information, even if it's not approved for public release by Hegseth's personal PR department. Now, this is so obvious it's effectively nonpartisan, which is why conservative news outlets from Fox News, Newsmax, Daily Caller, Real Clear Politics, The Washington Examiner, all joined liberal and mainstream organizations in rejecting this arrangement. In fact, the only outlet that has agreed to the Pentagon's terms is One America News Network, which is effectively tied to the administration. Carrie Lake, overseer of the government-funded broadcaster Voice of America, announced earlier this year that the platform would use content from OANN. As an aside, this is a very good argument against government-funded media, be it right-leaning or left-leaning. Now, the major broadcast channels issued a joint statement reading in part, "The policy is without precedent and threatens core journalistic protections. We will continue to cover the U.S. military as each of our organizations has done for many decades, upholding the principles of a free and independent press." Now, in response, the department is attempting to split hairs. Quote, "The policy does not ask for them to agree, just to acknowledge that they understand what our policy is," said Sean Parnell, a spokesperson for the Pentagon Department. "This has caused reporters to have a full-blown meltdown, crying victim online. We stand by our policy because it's what's best for our troops and the national security of this country," end quote. Whether it's agreeing to the policy or acknowledging the policy, look, this comes to the same thing. The Pentagon doesn't want reporters asking questions and obtaining answers without Hegseth's approval. That's self-evidently absurd and is not in the interests of liberals or conservatives, or more importantly, the American public. Now, why liberals should reject such a policy is fairly obvious. Trump-critical journalists should feel free to hold the administration to account. But even MAGA-friendly reporters, and this is important, even they don't want to feel deterred from doing their jobs. For instance, imagine if, for instance, a conservative outlet obtained a tip that some defense sub-department, maybe a subcontractor, was still using DEI in hiring, or had issued a policy directive that is contrary to America First, or had simply misappropriated taxpayer funds. It happens. This last example is hardly theoretical. The Pentagon has failed 7 audits in a row. Now, it might be embarrassing for Hegseth or whoever is in charge of the department that this had happened under their watch, and they might wish to suppress a news report on it, even from conservatives. The incentive would be to decline to authorize the release of information about the situation or to release it in a way that is flattering to the administration's perspective. But conservative news organizations shouldn't play by those rules. They would be doing their readers, viewers, and subscribers a disservice if they did. Here was Ron Paul, who's no fan of mainstream media, nevertheless explaining the other day why this new policy of limiting journalist access is just very, very bad for freedom.
We don't think this is a very good idea to curtailing the ability to find information and sign up if you even want to get on a list where you might get a little bit of information. I think it's a very dangerous move that's going on right now.
Now, to the Trump administration's credit, they have made space for new media, for podcasters, social media influencers, and so on in the press pool. President Trump and his comms team understand that more and more Americans are getting news and information from a more diverse array of content providers who make use of all the new platforms available to them: YouTube, X, Spotify, Instagram, Substack, Rumble, and so on. People who make content for those platforms should have a seat at the table. Out with the old and in with the new. I'm fine with that. But as we transition to new media and discard what wasn't working about old media, we don't want to create a new media environment that fails to do solid reporting or hold the government accountable at all. Just because Hegseth is well liked by MAGA doesn't mean he should be immune from scrutiny. Conservatives need to make sure the administration is fulfilling its priorities. We don't want them getting too comfortable. If reporters can't ask questions, then we, the public, can't get answers.
I think I would fully endorse that, Robby. I don't really see anything there that I disagree with. And I think the point that you rightly highlight is the idea that this new Pentagon policy is really calling for people to simply parrot the official line. It's really calling for stenography rather than journalism. Right. That's what press offices and comms people exist for, is to put forward their preferred version of events. But that's not journalism. And to your point about the audits, the Pentagon is, as we know, this vastly funded operation, taxpayer money going in there by the billion, and of course it is in the public interest to find out what is going on there. And just a couple of other quick points. I do think it is to the credit of conservative-leaning organisations that they have, with the exception of OAN, declined to sign this. I think that's good that they're standing up for those journalistic principles. And I also think that some of the arguments made in defence of the policy, that it's about security and whatnot, are just founded on erroneous impressions, like the idea that reporters were wandering around sort of looking into the closets at the Pentagon. As
arguments about, from a security standpoint, often are the most dubious.
Yeah, absolutely. So none of those arguments stand up, I think, and it's good that only OAN has signed up to this. I think they look, frankly, rather foolish. I don't know whether they care or not. Perhaps their priority is simply kissing up to the administration. Mm-hmm. But it's good that there has been with their exception, media solidarity in opposition to this.
Right. And I just want to, push back on the idea that to be conservative media, to be pro-MAGA, to have a perspective that is friendly to what Trump is trying to accomplish, doesn't mean to be a cheerleader.
Right.
And look, if that's the perspective you have, that's fine. I'm not going to tell you not to have that perspective. I think people who have that perspective, again, should have a seat at the table and a voice in the room. But it can't be only that. There has to be pushback, or else conservatives will be ill-served. Mm-hmm. Because, even if you love Trump and you love Hegseth and you love what they're doing, They are politicians. They're government figures.
Right.
We don't want them getting comfortable. We want scrutiny because these are, even if you support everything they're doing, as you said, these are massive agencies that have huge budgets that maybe they're doing something that Trump doesn't like, and we're going to call that out. And maybe it's embarrassing the other way. Who knows?
Yeah.
But the reporters have to be unconstrained.
Right.
They can't agree, yeah, we're going to tie our hands behind our back as we
Right.
try to look at what the Pentagon's doing. It makes no sense. It does not serve their own audiences, which is why they've signed on to this opposition to the statement.
Absolutely, and I agree completely. There's a difference between news that is reported with a certain perspective, but is still valid journalism, and cheerleading, which is just cheerleading of no worth.
Can't have that.
Robby, what is on your radar?
Indeed. Well, the ladies of The View think Republicans, particularly Republican men, are too afraid of them to come on the show. Seriously. Host Joy Behar made that case during a recent episode. Take a look.
I think that we should have more Republicans on the show, but they don't want to come on. They're scared of us. It's like Marjorie Taylor Greene says that she finds the Republican men afraid of powerful women. Well, that may be true of all the political persuasions. But if they would come on this show and they can explain to us what they're trying to do to this country.
Are Republican men afraid of powerful women, afraid to go on The View? I call BS on Joy Behar's claim. No, I do not think Republicans would refuse the opportunity to go on The View. In fact, I suspect that virtually every Republican commentator, pundit, or politician of even basic talent or media savvy would relish the opportunity to mix things up with Joy and Sunny and Whoopi and all the rest. Conservatives love arguing with liberals. Look at how much fun Scott Jennings is having on CNN. Look how much fun I'm having here on Rising. The fun never ends. That's because members of the GOP aren't looking for some safe space where their views are never challenged. Oh no. They aren't afraid of gladiatorial intellectual combat. Now, look, I am definitely painting with a broad brush here. I'm sure there are some Republican political activists who wouldn't enjoy the specific format of The View or don't have enough confidence in themselves. But come on, you know I'm right that the vast majority would love a chance to explain their thinking to Joy. Get Ben Shapiro on there. Get Matt Walsh. Get Glenn Beck or Sean Hannity. Heck, get Scott Jennings. He'd be perfect. There are plenty of terrific ladies who would also get the job done as well. Get Rising's Amber Duke. She'd love it. I have her number. Ask if you want it. Now, why am I talking about all this? Well, for one thing, I think it's important to dispel the idea that the two sides of the political spectrum don't enjoy talking to each other. And I get why this notion endures. Americans are sharply divided on politics, and they strongly disagree about which set of ideas, left-wing ideas, right-wing ideas, some mix of the two, would be best for the country. Disagreement can be unpleasant for those who don't engage in it as a job or sport or full-time hobby. Certainly not fun to argue all the time. It's not fun to go through life being constantly challenged. And unfortunately, too much of the media mirrors the sharp partisan split. For a long time, we've had mainstream media and we have conservative media. With conservative media, you get an explicitly right-wing perspective that is usually very favorable to President Donald Trump, maybe with some token liberal perspective thrown in as an occasional foil. With mainstream media, you get faux neutrality that's actually very liberal, particularly on cultural issues where it's downright progressive left, and then some token Republican in name only who is actually a Trump-hating ex-member of the GOP. The View itself mimics this dynamic as the right-leaning member of the panel, Alyssa Farah Griffin, is a former White House staffer who's extremely opposed to Trump, which, by the way, is a perfectly valid opinion, but not one that represents the vast majority of conservatives. Most conservatives love Trump. Now, there are some exceptions, but over the course of my lifetime, it's become increasingly rare to find real debate on cable news. It's more about humoring the perspectives of the hosts and the perspective of the audience. Well, who's learning anything from that? The great thing, in my view, about the rise of new media, social media, YouTube, etc., is that these platforms have brought back real debate. Now you have people arguing about politics at great length on the internet, and these people represent not just some stale two-party duopoly, but a range of ideological perspectives, from socialism to libertarianism to MAGA populism to abundance democracy to everything in between. I'm proud that Rising, this show, which was ahead of the curve when it launched 7 years ago, has played a role in fostering these important debates and continues in that fine tradition today. And if Joy Behar wants to familiarize herself with what happy debate looks like, well, she's welcome to call me up for The View. I don't love New York City, and as I'm reading the polls for the mayoral race, I think I'm about to love it even less. But for you, Joy, I'd be happy to make the trip.
Robby Soave on The View. It's what the public want, what the people want, Robby.
Give the people what they want.
Exactly. So we were kidding because I messed up slightly in the intro and almost started reading that.
Yes.
But in fact, as I was listening to you, I could have read the vast majority of it and agreed with all of it, really, in terms of the need for more rigorous and authentic debate, the way that the room for that seems to have got narrowed on cable news. It does.
So narrow.
It does, very much so. It used to exist more so than it does now, and as you rightly pointed out, a lot of the time on both sides, the dissenting voice can be rather tokenistic or not in fact representative. I mean, you mentioned Alyssa Farah Griffin, but Fox News also has those people who I consider people who play Democrats on Fox News, which isn't real. They're not really indicative of a particular progressive school of thought. There are also issues, I know even some past commentators on this show would have argued that even on networks like MSNBC, what you hear is a kind of democratic leadership voice as opposed to, actual voices from a harder left kind of perspective often. So all of that is true, and I think it's a shame. I do think that we have genuine debates that are civil but emphatic and honest here, and I think that happens elsewhere in the digital space, but much less so on linear television.
Right, and we are free, you and I are freed because we're primarily journalists. I mean, we have ideological point of views. We are freed from just kind of defending what the Republican Party is doing or the Democratic Party is doing. We have no interest in that. The people really have no interest in that. That mode of commentary has gotten very, very stale.
It has.
Maybe that's what was wrong with that, because I know everybody maligns the kind of crossfire era as being shallow, although in some ways I think it is, again, it's superior to, again, just having a host and just having the same perspective represented.
Well, it is, except the problem that I have with the crossfire model is that it did get very talking points. Like, it seemed to me like you just, and I don't mean the show talking points, I mean party talking points, where you actually would just bring people on and have somebody mouth Republican talking points and have someone mouth Democratic talking points. And that's not really a debate, and it's not very interesting for viewers.
Tucker Carlson was involved in the end of it, and I think you can see how that format obviously limited his huge potential as someone who can speak at great length in a way that is not just narrowly focused on what's good for the Republican Party. I think his detractors would say, some of his detractors are in the Republican Party. They wish he'd stop calling them out, but it was so limited by the format. And what YouTube and Substack and social media have allowed us to do is have these longer discussions and debates where you must get beyond talking points, because the talking points that you'd have prepared or a partisan operative would have prepared cannot fill the time. We have to go beyond it. I mean, I remember when I started doing Rising at the beginning, transitioning most from doing those kinds of hits on cable news, where like we have to get to at least 8 minutes. In our previous only YouTube format, we absolutely had to get 8 minutes. Sometimes I'm like, I don't know if I have 8 minutes worth of things to say. And you train to actually say something real, to get beyond just what you'd hear anywhere else.
And also to actually defend in debate your position rather than simply you shout your part and the other person shouts their part and then you're done.
Right, because you can defend any position for 10 seconds, but if I can't defend it for 8 minutes, maybe it was a weaker position than I thought.
Exactly.